Hello and welcome back to another episode of Magnetic Masculinity Podcast. And today I feel like we're taking a turn where I would say all women also are invited to listen to this episode because the main topic of this episode is women and how are we failing men? Can we maybe start with talking about why are we talking about this? And how did we get to the point where this conversation feels relevant enough for us to have an episode about it?
Yes, great. So here we are, a couple of women, and we are about to call our gender out on the ways that we're failing men. And I would like to start by, I think this is important and relevant because in order to heal something, it first needs to be acknowledged. Awareness is a crucial component of expansion, evolving, and becoming more love. So I think that a lot of people might feel reactive and think, yes, but men have done this and men have done that. And I would like to start by saying this is an and reality. This is a multidimensional reality. So it's not this or that. Are men bad or are women bad? It's not like that. We all need to be acknowledged in order to heal. And one of the best ways to level up in the game of life is by acknowledging what's not working. And I think as again, I'm speaking a little bit in binary terms of gender, but I would like to acknowledge that anybody on any gender spectrum is valid, but I'm speaking in the more historical context of masculine, feminine. And because of the oppression and the oppression to women that came along with the patriarchal paradigm we followed for a long time, where not only women suffered, but men weren't thriving necessarily in that environment either, most of them, even though it may have appeared that way. But what we've done is what we often do in society is we take a pendulum from here and we go, wait, this doesn't work. And then we go zing all the way over here to a completely opposite side. And that's okay because that's often how we find that middle or that balance. But I think right now we're in a pendulum swing where we are doing to men what we know experientially didn't work for us and hurt us. And I think that in order for everybody to thrive on any gender spectrum, we need to acknowledge each other's pain, acknowledge what's not working, and be accountable. Like I always say, own our awesome and own our crap. And don't make either of them mean anything. And I think that that's just really important that we acknowledge that because a lot of men might feel that way, but they're not allowed to talk about it because men are bad and toxic and women have genuinely been oppressed and women have genuinely, myself included, experienced a lot of pain and trauma and suffering in the more patriarchal way of living. I have experienced a lot of assault and abuse and things from men. But that doesn't mean that I'm painting all men with that brush. And I think even the men that are behaving in a pained way, I think that's a symptom of a problem, not the problem itself. So I think in order to move forward and for the divine masculine and the divine feminine or any combination of the two to really rise and thrive and expand into our most magnetic lives and supportive, collaborative, collective society and culture, it requires acknowledging what's not working. And right now, I think what we're doing to men is not working.
So before we go into some ways in how women might be failing men, why do you think I'm just thinking, so let's say if women experience being treated a certain way, why is it that the pendulum swings and it goes back to women treating men that way? I'm just like curious or like just thinking on what could cause that instead of let's say like we have this experience, we learn from it, and we don't want men to experience that same thing, or we have more compassion towards them, and that not being the case. Again, not 100%
Great
situations, but
question.
overall.
Great question. I don't know that I have a complete answer to that, but I'll reflect some perspectives, and I'd love anybody else's input on this as well. I believe that, or I suspect, or I guess that that's a natural way for humans to learn. So again, the pendulum swing itself is okay, right? It's like we're here, we go here. That's a valid way to find here. It's not typical. Sometimes we might just accidentally find here, but that's a typical valid way to learn, right? But I do think that from a soul perspective or a higher consciousness perspective, the best way to learn a lesson and really integrate it, at least in my own life and in my own journey, is to do something, have it done to us so we know what it feels like, so that we can have compassion for both sides. We're like, oh, I don't have to make either side bad or wrong because I've experienced both sides. So I think from an evolutionary completion or a cycle completion perspective, you know, that can be, it's not the only way, but it's one way that I have found in my own personal journey and in my own relationships and in my own acknowledging my own shadows or toxic traits, that to me is a really fulfilling way to come fully into love, not only by making ourselves bad or wrong, but by understanding things from different perspectives, which is what I believe the source consciousness itself is trying to do through you and I. So I think that it's quite typical for people to have a lot of blind spots. So if we experience something and it makes us feel a certain way, we might mirror or mimic that behavior because that's what we know. But because we don't want to see ourselves as bad or wrong, and human beings are not trained to search for their own inefficacies, be out of shame, that it makes sense to me that we swing that pendulum the other way and then we're like, I'm not doing that. I would never be like that because that's bad or wrong. But for some people, and I don't think everybody does it that way, I think some people go, wait, I don't want to do that to others. Like I've been really bullied. I've been really emotionally invalidated or treated really unkindly by my peers. So therefore I'm like, I know how that feels. I don't ever want to do that to others. But I think that's one way to learn. And another way to learn is to do something and have it done to us and really integrate that. And I think it's just blind spots, lack of awareness, or, you know, like that sort of mindset of like evening the playing field, you know, fighting fire with fire. Or I think in a lot of cases, most women are just completely oblivious to it because we've normalized it, the same as men were oblivious when they were doing it to us because it had been normalized. It's just what we know, right? That was done to us. That's all we know. So we're not intentionally being horrible to men, maybe in some cases out of punishing. But then why would we not understand when men did that to us? You know, it's like it's double standards.
Yeah, even like as you were talking, I was thinking on like, is it that response of treating men similar to the way women have been treated? Could that be like trauma response?
Absolutely could be. Or even yeah, because traumatized people sometimes shut down, traumatized. There's no wrong way, you know, trauma can look very different in different people. But one way it can look is to mirror or mimic or repeat those familiar patterns. That's like, you know, neuroplasticity. The brain likes what is not necessarily what is in our highest good and the highest good of the planet, but the brain, being like a computer algorithm or an interface for consciousness, likes to repeat what is familiar to it. So that could be a component.
And actually, I think before we go in,
Or hurt people. That's another way to look at it.
yeah, last question before we go a bit more into examples. If there's any women listening, and let's say as they listen through, they might start to feel shame or they start to feel badly about, you know, some of the things that we walk through, as they might identify they have played some part in that. What would you suggest to them before we go into that so that they can maybe cope with it or deal with it?
A couple of things. One, I've done all the things. I've participated in all these things. And I'm really proud of myself that I was able to look at that. Instead of beating myself up for what I did when I was unaware, I look at it as I went from here to here. So celebrate your expansion, right? That's the only way we can grow, is we don't expect ourselves to be born perfect. It's that bravery of willing to look at what's not working that makes us a truly exceptional human being. And it's also how you level up in the game of life, is you look at what's not working, you shift it, and source or the universe always rewards that. We're not punished for what we did when we didn't know better. We're celebrated for the fact that we became aware and then made a conscious choice to do better. That's how evolution works.
All right. So let's dive into it. I think we could start with the shaming language.
Yeah. Okay. So shaming language, I'll give you some examples. I watched a TV show, a really like a dating show online that's like, I don't watch a lot of TV. My husband and I read to each other in the evenings. We have like pretty conscious schedule, but sometimes we just like to let our inner parts out and we just sit and binge watch a trashy dating show. We love it. And for me, it's like human behavior. So I'm just like, no, I love it. But I was really disappointed and upset and also self-aware how it's normalized that women can say things that men cannot. And in this case, it was 3 seasons in a row where I heard conversations like, okay, so you spent your first night together. How big are his feet? You know what I mean? Like, I ain't gonna be with no guy if he's got a little one, and things like that, where it's just like, can you imagine if on television, maybe it still does happen, I probably just don't consume that content. And I think it used to be the norm, but it wasn't okay. So why is it okay for us? So I don't think it's helpful to say, well, they did it, but that doesn't mean we should do it. Where imagine if they're like, so you finally spent the night with her last night. Like, you know, how was she down there? Did the carpet match the drapes? We hate when people say things like that, or like, how tight was she? Or I'm sorry for the vulgar, but that's basically what they're doing. Or we tell people, oh, that guy has little penis syndrome, or that guy has little man syndrome, or, oh, you know, it's in popular culture, like big money, big genitals, big, you know, and judging men based on that, like, oh, I met him, you know, honey, oh, girl, I saw how big his hands were. He's going to be just fine. But if men do that to women, we flip out. Like, it's not okay. You know, and I think we've really normalized body shaming. Like, oh, look at his big pot belly. That guy's so fat. Look how fat that guy is. I see that a lot too. Or my friends saying like, oh, look at my husband. He's getting so fat. Stop eating that steak. Your doctor told you you're getting sick. Look how fat you are. If a man said that to a woman, we would flip out. Again, right? We'd be like, you can't body shame me. Well, we body shame men constantly and set men up to these standard of like Marvel movies and like how big and buff and ripped they need to be. And we don't really talk about how that might make men feel. We know how it feels because it's been done to us. It's awful, right? And I think a lot of men that I've worked with, even really gorgeous, fit looking men, are riddled with body insecurity. Men are equally, I have to fact check this, but equally, if not more likely to have eating disorders. So men are constantly body shamed and held up to a certain standard and shamed for the size of their genitals, the size of their muscles, the size of their weight, you know?
Question that I had.
Or wait, another one is like, oh, you know, men are so stupid. What do we need men for? You know, men are so unevolved. Men are so primitive. Men can't do anything right. Men are useless. Men can't do this. Men can't, you know, it's just like a lot of man shaming. And I think that's just really, we know better because it's been done to us. We know it doesn't feel good. And I have participated in that. Like, oh, look at that guy with his big truck. You know what that's compensating for? You know, things like that are just really unkind, or songs that I would listen to. I remember a song I used to listen to. And again, that was maybe a sign of the times, but it was a song like, I don't want no short man. Don't want, you know what I mean? Like talking about like something that men have no control over, the size of their penis. Men have no control over, you know, if they have a big, brawny looking, you know, body, or if they're strong or tough, or if they're a bit chubby, or, you know, whatever it is, or if they're balding men. We shame hair on men. things that are out of their control. I mean, I suppose weight's in their control, but a lot of those things are out of their control, and it's very normalized. And in society, you know, there's just women get together and I see them just like complain about their husbands, complain about men, complain about how unevolved men are. And it just feels very, I've done it, all of it. And I no longer prefer it because it doesn't feel good to me to do that, because I know what it feels like to have that done to me.
The question I had was when it comes to body shame, and even like when you touched on the men are stupid, if there are men listening who might identify that, I think especially if it's their partner or somebody really close to them, have either communicated that or they might even be like joking about it, how
Yeah.
to start conversation about it.
Hmm. I think that could be hard for a lot of people. And I want to first point out or expand on something that you mentioned that I think is really an important part, which is the culture we have of joking, which is okay. I like a sense of humor. I don't actually take anything personally. It's almost impossible to offend me. There's like maybe two things that could offend me. So I don't mind. I'm not in a cancel culture mindset where we can't say anything and, you know, but I think it's just more about being compassionate with our words. Words are medicine or words are poison. And one of the tools that I give people that's so simple, but so hard is just never use your words as poison. Words are medicine or words are poison. And often a strategy we've created to bond in society is by poking fun at each other. And that's okay. It's a way to connect. It's not the worst. It keeps us like a little lighthearted. But I also don't think it's as kind as bonding over like what's awesome about each other. Instead of like, well, that's you know, you've always been a bit of a fatty, or I don't know. Like I hang around certain families and I'm just like, the way they speak to each other and cut each other down and like talk about each other in a joking way, they're actually trying to connect. They just don't have the tools or strategies to connect emotionally. So they're connecting through banter, which can sometimes border really on unkindness. And I think that's pretty common, but I think maybe as we evolve out of the emotional dark ages, it'll be more helpful if we really learn to cherish and protect each other's self-esteem. And again, not go into the extreme pendulum swing of like being offended by everything. I don't think that's necessarily optimal either. But just by like cheering each other on, right? But so many of us have that our own inner critic and we're constantly berating ourselves. So it's sort of like this outer projection of like how we feel about ourselves and just everybody kind of picking away at each other rather than building each other up, which I think will be just more fun in the future when we slowly start to integrate that. And to the second part of your point, how do they start a conversation about that? That can be tricky. I would say the best, it depends how, first of all, if you communicate it, it's not going to be helpful to do what women have done and that I have also participated, which is, well, you're doing this and you do that, and that's not fair, and you're being this or you're being that. That's not helpful. Be self-reflective and say, hey, I've noticed that we both do this. Or taking it one step further and saying, I've noticed that I do this. And I wonder how that makes you feel. And it's something I would like to shift in our relationship. Could we try this instead? Or just genuinely saying, when you say X, Y, or Z, I feel ashamed or I feel bad about myself. And I know you don't mean to, but it really impacts me. So there's lots of different ways you could bring it up. And the most important thing, I think, is to just start showing people a different way. Be the change you want to see in the world, as they say. So start implementing your own strategies. And I can speak from experience that sometimes this actually makes people uncomfortable or unfamiliar. Like people get very uncomfortable when they see how my partner and I talk to each other, because it's so kind and supportive and loving. It makes them feel triggered or unsafe or uncomfortable because it's unfamiliar. And again, the brain and the nervous system is attracted to what is familiar to it, not necessarily what's in our highest, most aligned, loving self. So,
I have a follow-up question to that conversation, but also partly that banter piece or connecting through, in some ways, like poking each other. Because I think the challenge might be when it comes to starting that conversation, the vulnerability piece and being vulnerable when the usual pattern is the other person making fun of you. So how to approach it in that dynamic where in some ways you might know that they actually might make fun of me being vulnerable and trying to open up about something that is really sensitive to me.
they might. I wish that wasn't the case, but because we're trying to evolve out of the emotional dark ages, that might be the case. I try to remember I have boundaries, so I don't allow people to be cruel to me, but I also don't take things personally. So if somebody said to me, for instance, "You're so fat," I'd be like, it really wouldn't bother me because I'm not. And I don't believe that about myself. And even if I did have extra weight, which I have had in the past, I have been fat, I know that that's something I can work on, not who I am. But if somebody says something to you that does hit you, remember that it means that person is informing you where you have a wound that you can strengthen. It doesn't mean you're never going to be offended by other people's words, because words do hurt. Words are medicine or words are poison. And pretending that we can never be affected by other people, I don't think is healthy or helpful. And I think that we are an interdependent species, so we do impact each other. But expecting other people to not impact you when we're learning a new way is less helpful than nourishing yourself, protecting yourself, and being brave enough to show people a different way while also maintaining healthy boundaries and letting people know if what they're saying is hurting you.
What should what should be expected instead? So you said kind of the showing up with expectation not to be impacted. What could be upgraded expectation to have, if any?
If you are impacted,
Pretty much like to your point of what you were talking, that if you show up to the conversation expecting not to be impacted, then it's not really helpful. What would be
no,
a better
that's fair.
expectation?
Yeah, maybe I didn't choose my words.
No, you explain it as like it's
Yeah.
not a good thing to do.
So I think showing up with no expectations. And if you are offended or impacted by the other person, finding a way to really presence and heal that wounded part of you. Because again, if there's no wound there, it's less likely to hurt you. You still might be like, whoa, that's not cool. And if it's somebody you're really close to who's saying things that are really unkind to you and that do really impact you, then maybe asking them if they would be willing to go to like a couples counselor or a couples coach or book a strategy session with me, or because I also don't want to condone abusive behavior or toxic behavior, and men absolutely can be victims of emotional abuse. I don't like the word victim, can receive emotional abuse, and that does impact you. It should impact you. Your feelings are valid, but it's important to separate what is that person saying and meaning versus what am I offended by. Because if we have a lot of shame or unhealed wounds or trauma or neurodivergence and might have rejection sensitivity dysphoria, we're going to feel attacked even when we're not. So over time, it's helpful to separate what is a wound, what is an incoming wound that's valid versus what is somebody just touching a spot where I had a giant festering wound that I wasn't aware of. And I don't think it's necessarily one or the other. I think over time, we develop the discernment to separate that. I don't know if I align with the like, nobody else has the right to hurt you. I think that's sort of gaslighting or invalidating the fact that we are impacted by others. We're an interdependent, emotional species that requires love and belonging. So you can do the internal work, and that's going to make you a little more resilient, and you're not going to be as impacted. But other people, how they speak to you should impact you. So it's also okay if you're impacted.
Can you also talk on, because I think some people listening might have or might benefit from getting more clarity on what does no expectations look like? Because I think in many ways we can identify what it is when we have expectations. But how does it look like or feel like when you don't have expectations or you show up without expectations?
So when I made this shift in my life, it was a huge, huge paradigm shift. So I'm trying to think through both sides. And occasionally now, when I fall back into expectation, which pretty much only happens in my marriage, in our deepest, most intimate, vulnerable relationship, is where we get to do that deepest work. And when old patterns have a tendency to come back, which is very normal. So an expectation is I'm going to say or do this or that, and that person is going to do or say this or that. For instance, I did this and this and this in the house today. And when my husband comes in the door, he is going to say, wow, you look beautiful today. Thank you for doing the dishes. And we sort of subconsciously create this script for them. And we create this script. We do not give them that script. We do not ask them to read it, nor do we identify if that is the right script for them to play. And then they come in and they say something that is off script, and we become disappointed. Whereas if we can start training ourselves over time to be curious instead of to have expectations, it doesn't mean we have no expectations, that like boundaries, like we expect people to treat us with respect, but when they're not, how do we approach that with curiosity about their experience? And am I having an expectation that my husband be perfect all the time, or that he knows what I'm thinking and wanting and needing? For instance, the other day, one of our songs that when we first met came on, and I came running out to the garage where he was working out in his gym, and I was like, guess what song just came on? Listen. And I was like, in my mind, I was like, it's going to be some romance Disney. And he's going to go, wow, the universe loves us. And look at this. Let's share a romantic moment. And he was like, yeah, it's probably just in the algorithms. And I was like, yeah, but I was just thinking about you. And this song came on. And for me, that was a bid for connection. That was like, I want you to experience this feeling of love with me. And then when he reacted like, that's not a big deal, I got really disappointed and angry and stormed away because my feelings were hurt. Now, if I went back to him and said, oh, here's what I was experiencing. I had created this big, I was feeling romantic and I was feeling connected to you and I was bidding for this mutual connection. And he said, oh my gosh, I totally missed that. Wow, thanks for sharing that with me. That's okay, right? We're mutually curious. Now, if he said, oh my God, that's so stupid. Why does that song mean anything? I already made you a smoothie and bought you a trip to Costa Rica. So why would you possibly feel, that's invalidating. I should expect him to be curious about my experience. But there's a difference between being curious about my experience and having an expectation of compassion and kindness, rather than expecting somebody to stick to our script or behave the way we want them to behave. Another example of this is if we're around our parents, which is where we get to really, or our parents, our family, that's where we really get to test how evolved we are. So if every time I was around a certain parent and I expected them to be really emotionally intelligent and emotionally available and to not criticize me and not point out every single thing that's wrong with everything, I'd be disappointed because that person wasn't who I wanted them to be, but they're exactly who they've always been. And why are they that way? What's going on in their reality, right? Instead of being like, oh, I'm going to cast Brad Pitt to play a role that Clint Eastwood should play. And, really I'm dealing with Barney the dinosaur. Like it's people are who they are. So I think there's a balance or a fine line between curiosity, expectation, boundaries, and also not setting other people up for failure. So last week I was visiting family. I came home. My husband had done an amazing job working full time, taking care of our 2 dogs, doing 4 walks a day, 2 dog walks each. He had cleaned the whole house when I came home. And when I walked in, I was like, oh, the house looks nice. Oh my God, guess what happened on this flight? Here's what I'm going to do this week. What are we going to do about this or that? Oh, that's weird. There's dog pee on the floor. Oh, was this, blah, blah, blah. But he hadn't yet gotten enough validation or appreciation for how hard he worked. In that case, I do feel like he deserved a lot more validation and a lot more appreciation. So when he brought that up to me, because we work like that, he's like, whoa, I feel like what I did, I didn't get enough appreciation for. So in that case, he was kind of writing a script for me, but it was valid. Do you know what I mean? So it's sort of trying to remain curious. And there's a lot of intricacies, which makes it confusing for listeners, perhaps, I understand. But I don't tend to subscribe to this model or that model, or, you should never have expectations, or you should never be offended, or you should this or that. I think over time, we, again, develop that discernment of knowing how to advocate for our wants, needs, boundaries, and values in a way that's loving. Now, if he had said to me, oh, that's just like you, you'll never appreciate anything I do, you're so selfish, or something like that, that would be very different than, do you see how much I did around the house? I need a little more validation here, and advocating for his needs. And I'm like, you're right. You absolutely deserve way more validation for that. You are amazing, and I love you, and I appreciate you, which is what happened. And then I went around saying, look, you did this and you did that, and you did this and you did that. I love that you did that. It makes me feel so safe to go away. I understand how you must have felt when I pointed out the 2 things that were wrong in the house. That wouldn't have felt nice. I wouldn't have liked that either. So I acknowledged his feelings. I met his needs. And yeah, so I think there's a lot of nuances in there, which is why, again, it's hard for me to give direct answers to everything, because we are such a multidimensional species. Every relationship is different. And often, like I always say, it's the energy behind the action that's as important as the action. So if I was like, oh, thanks for doing everything in the house, I guess I have to thank you all day long. Okay, is that enough appreciation? That's very different than, oh, yeah, you did such a good job. Thank you so much. I appreciate you,
So with this, I think it's valuable to touch on emotional invalidation and what's the role that women might play in men suppressing their emotions.
Yeah, so this is another pendulum swing, or something that I've definitely participated in historically, which is not always communicating our emotional needs skillfully, and maybe not encouraging men to, because we sort of want that divine masculine to like nurture us or protect us, contain us, cherish us, make us feel safe. And some women, when their husband or their partner falls apart or gets sad or gets upset, they feel unsafe. Or they might say, like, be strong. I need you to be strong right now. Like, I need you to support me. I need you to be there for me. I need you to listen to me. And then and then the next day we might be like, why aren't you more sensitive and open? But then sometimes when they do try to be sensitive and open, we'll invalidate them or say, well, what did you expect? Like, because sometimes to women, I think we're like, how do you not see that emotional thing that's so obvious for me? and we're like, what do you mean you didn't get that? Or what else do you think would like, so it's sort of like an invalidation or a, you shouldn't feel that way because I do all the dishes or whatever it is. I think a lot of men experience a lot of emotional invalidation, or there's just some men also say there's just no room for their emotions because they're constantly, probably unskillfully, but constantly trying to manage a lot of emotional fluctuations or hormonal fluctuations, which are totally valid. In women, they feel that there's no space for their emotions, or they feel like if I'm not the strong one, she's going to fall apart. Or women do sometimes invalidate men. And I think we can maybe somewhat do it with a sense of humor in some ways, like mansplaining. Like instead of being like, don't mansplain that to me, I'm not stupid. It's more like, oh, you're trying to be helpful and make sure that I understand so that we can connect. Thank you. But I think it's a little funny. Or, oh, you're mansplaining again to me, but thank you for trying to help me understand. There's just, again, there's tone, there's intention. Those things are very different. But yes, emotional invalidation, I think, is very common. But I also do think that some part of that is, which I'm not judging, but is emotional unskillfulness on the part of the men trying to explain it, or them not understanding their own emotion and just getting angry instead of being able to say, I feel really sad when I come home from work and you don't ask me how my day was and you instantly launch into all your problems. I feel sad and alone. So they don't. Instead, they just get cranky or bitchy or invalidating her. And then they start, the dance. So I think there's accountability on both sides. And again, it's very different in different relationships based on their personality, their trauma, their dynamics. So I can't really speak to specifics because everybody's a little different.
Here, actually, on that, not communicating emotions or in some ways getting angry on men's side, what would be what would women need to understand about men and shame? As a lot of times, I'm pretty sure we have talked about it in the podcast, those behaviors can be a result of shame.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. In fact, they're either shame and fear or just unawareness and unskillfulness, right? It'd be like women expect men to have all of these skills, but men aren't taught these skills, right? We've cut off their emotional legs in childhood, and then we're like, what's wrong with you? Why can't you walk up the stairs? They can't because we cut their legs off in society. So I would say what women could really understand is patience, creating a safe space for men to try to explain their emotions, asking clarifying questions. The same as if, and again, I'm really gender stereotyping, so I'd like to acknowledge that, don't come for me. It would be like, and to be fair, I'm the handier one in my house because I had to learn a lot of house handy skills living on an acreage prior to this, but it would be like a man going, oh, can you just go change the oil on the car? And the woman being like, I don't really know how to do that. And then being like, well, if you loved me, you would just change the oil in the car. Why can't you change the oil in the car? What's wrong with you? Like, come on. Why? It's not hard. It's easy. I can do it. Well, it's easy for you. It's not easy for her. Same as emotions. They're easy for you. In childhood, you were given like 25 emotional crayons to color with. They were given 2. Get stuff done and be happy or be angry. That's like, they weren't. So just being patient, compassionate, asking, being soft, being slow, going slow. When our nervous system is activated, and especially in men, and it clicks over to that left brain thinking, it takes longer neurologically for a man to shift from that into his heart, or what we're oversimplifying by saying the right brain. And it takes sort of like slow, gentle, patient. Women, we can process emotions like on the go. We're like, I feel angry and sad and this and that. and blah, 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 and now I'm good. Okay, let's go. Beep. Men aren't like that necessarily. And again, I'm generalizing. But statistically, men are more likely and neurobiologically are more likely to need time. And if we create a really safe, really loving, supportive, and calm environment, and say, maybe sometimes saying like, hey, you can think about it. Here are some things you might want to think about. Maybe ask yourself a couple of questions. Do you want me to sit here and hold you? Do you want to go for a walk? And giving them a little bit of time to process those emotions and being very loving and compassionate. And then sometimes mansplaining emotions to them a little bit in a very compassionate way. And not just expecting them to know things that are easy for you or to process as quickly or want to talk about them as thoroughly as we might.
What did you say could be getting in women's way of creating that loving, supportive environment?
Lack of practice, nobody modeling that to them. We're living in the emotional dark ages, or just that unawareness or that expectation that a lot of us humans have that other people are like us. We either think nobody's like us and we're like the only one who feels this way, or we tend to go the other way where we're like, it's obvious to me, so why isn't it obvious to you? And I think a lot of times women just don't have that awareness or that insight or that understanding of how men think, how they emote, and we don't have that experience. Some women do, again, but generally speaking, to stereotype, women statistically have more exposure to an acceptance of emotions. Not necessarily, and not in a healthy way. I'm not saying women are like completely emotionally realized. In fact, when we have men in the home that fear their own emotions, they fear others' emotions or judge others' emotions, which again becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy or this chicken, egg, chicken, egg, chicken, egg. So it's not about this person's fault or that person's fault. It's about what does this person need? What does this person need? And how can I keep my side of the street clean? And how can I show up to help the people that I really care about expand their emotional awareness, tune into that emotional navigation system and charge that heart battery and reprogram some of that old software that no longer serves them.
So speaking on evolvement and evolution, what would be the path forward of like getting away from this us versus them?
I think awareness, compassion, and I think that really doing the work on ourselves and cultivating, following the magnetic masculinity blueprint and cultivating clarity on your authentic alignment, as well as your authentic wants, needs, boundaries, and values, and learning how to reprogram your brain, charge your heart battery, get your emotional navigation system online. When you're in that state of self-acceptance and you can own your awesome and you can own your crap without making either of them mean anything, you're just going to be a more compassionate, energized person, and other people are going to respond to that energy. And then if you just start thinking about like, how would I want to be treated in that person's situation, or how would I feel in that person's situation, and starting to be really curious about other people's experiences and taking little vows like, am I using my words as medicine or poison? Even if I was served poison as a child with words, you're stupid, you're never good enough, you're too sensitive, you're not this, you're not that, man, and not whatever it is, the cure to poison is not poison. It's more medicine or more nourishment. So even if somebody else is behaving poorly, it's keeping your side of the street clean. It's allowing your emotions to be valid and not just being like, oh, I'm not affected by anything, I only feel love and light. No, we are human beings and we feel anger and we feel sadness and we feel judgment and we feel jealousy and we feel all of those things. And those are all valid and they are perfectly divine and perfectly evolved and perfectly enlightened. Not to disassociate from those things, being really loving and patient with ourselves and others, because again, how we treat ourselves, we project onto others sometimes. So I think, yeah, I think our way forward is just less fear and more love, which involves really understanding ourselves, getting our needs met in a healthy way, having healthy boundaries, and knowing what really lights us up. And when somebody is in that authentic alignment and they are, aware of the programs that don't work in their supercomputer brain, and they are listening to their emotional navigation system and not stuffing down those emotional beach balls, and their heart battery is charged, and they're learning that skill of vulnerability and connection over time, that's just going to become like a ripple effect. Boop, 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 boop. And we're going to start modeling to people different behaviors than the behaviors that they're used to, which might make people uncomfortable at the beginning because it's unfamiliar, but it's just being the change you want to see in the world, I guess, to borrow that very good cliche again.
Last question that I have is, let's say we have a couple listening and they're like, listen, we're done with doing the pendulum swings. We have been doing it both ways. And we do want to build that mutual curiosity. What would be some of the guidelines or some of the advice how they can start doing that? Because it's not like once you start, that's a done deal.
No, and just because it's relatively simple, which it is actually relatively simple, it's not that easy, always. I'm trying to think of some books. We could list, let's you and I create a list of books for people that they could try reading. But just remember, or they could book a discovery call. They could book a free strategy session with me and we could sort it out, and I could give them some tools that I use when I work with couples. Or sometimes I'm working with a man right now whose partner wants no part of any therapy or coaching and thinks that he is 100% of the problem. So but he really wants the marriage to work. So he and I are working on strategies of how he can model different behavior and create change from within. So yeah, we'll create a little list of books that I recommend. And expect yourself to fail. Expect yourself to fail and expect your partner to fail. And use conflict as a conscious tool for connection, because conflict is actually really sort of like our triggers and our conflicts are the portals or gateways to expansion and evolution. So sort of reframing some of those things over time eventually is going to create new software, new behaviors, and eventually it's going to be like second nature, like it is for me now. But that's going to take time, repetition, and a lot of failure and a lot of laughter. Approaching it with a little bit of lightheartedness can be helpful. Like my husband and I will be like, okay, let's put on our confession hat, or let's put on our I'm going to see you clearly glasses, or we kind of like make a little joke about it. Okay, when you did this, I felt this way. And I'm like, oh, yeah, you should feel that way. It's not like coming at me after a long day and I been holding space for my maids and clients all day and then saying, you never, blah, blah, blah. It's setting conscious time for not only conscious conflict, but conscious connection. Because if you're constantly adding to your partner's emotional bucket or emotional bank account, it's going to be okay that you occasionally make a withdrawal. But if you're making withdrawals, or you're already in overdraft, you're going to have to compensate for that by really making a lot of deposits and asking yourself in any given moment, am I using my words as medicine or poison? And really digging deep. And even if somebody else is serving you poison, you don't have to swallow it. And it's never helpful to serve poison back. The other thing you can do for self-accountability is asking yourself, what am I making it mean? So for my instance, like the other day when I wanted to share that romantic song that came on Alexa while I was cooking my husband his favorite dinner, and I was like, oh my God, I'm like the most amazing wife in the world right now. And then I felt that he rejected my bid for connection, which in a way he did, but we came back to it. I made it mean, I probably didn't, but there's a time in my life where I would have made it mean that he doesn't care about me. I would have made it mean he doesn't like me. I could have made it mean any sort of thing. And that's my accountability. That's not on him, right? Even a couple I'm working with right now, he's trying to overcome a sex and gambling addiction. And they want to work through that together. And he needs to acknowledge how that's impacted her negatively. But one of the things that was really causing her pain was that she was making it mean he doesn't love her. And she can acknowledge how that's impacting her, and it is impacting her negatively. And all of that is valid and needs to be addressed and acknowledged by him. But we add an extra layer of pain to things when we make it mean something that says more about something about our wounds rather than their actions. So yes, he missed my bid for affection. He didn't know that I was like blissed out in the kitchen, like overflowing with love and wanting to share that intimate moment with him. But this guy shows me 100 times a day that he cares about me and that he loves me and cherishes me and prioritizes me and validates me and appreciates me and acknowledges me. So if I made that time mean that he didn't care about me, that's on me. And that's not fair. Yeah. So those are a couple of tips, but we'll make a little list of books that I think could be helpful, or book a strategy session, book a life diagnostic. You get that free session with me where we can explore your unique magnetic masculinity blueprint, or we can explore working together. And even if we're not a great fit to work together, you can still get a lot of value out of that time together. And I can at least help you find different resources if I'm not the right one. And I'll happily do that.
And if you have any questions, comments, there's always a link in show notes as well. And if you're listening on audio, please review the podcast, subscribe, so that we can reach more people and help more people evolve out of emotional dark ages.
Yes, thank you.